The chandelier in the Mercer Estate Library was 200 years old, Venetian glass that cast light making everything beneath it look like a painting from another century. Vera Holloway had restored textiles in this room for 9 months. She knew every thread in the damask curtains, every worn patch in the Persian carpets. She did not know how to stand in this room as anything other than hired help. "You expect me to believe this child is mine." Elliot Mercer's voice carried the careful pronunciation of old money, each word landing like a verdict already delivered. He sat behind the mahogany desk that had belonged to 5 generations of his family, and he was not alone. "I would not be here if it was not the truth." Vera heard her own voice, steadier than she felt. She had rehearsed this conversation for 6 weeks, ever since the doctor confirmed what she already knew. In none of those rehearsals had she imagined an audience. Cordelia Mercer occupied the wingback chair near the fireplace, her posture suggesting she had been expecting exactly this moment. Prudence, Elliot's sister, leaned against the bookshelf examining her manicure with theatrical boredom. 3 household staff members stood near the door, summoned without explanation, their faces carefully blank. The architecture of power was unmistakable. Vera stood while they Saturday. She wore her work clothes while they wore their armor of wealth. She had come to share private news and found herself facing a tribunal. "Darling girl." Cordelia's voice carried a small, elegant laugh, the kind refined across generations to communicate contempt without appearing vulgar. "Do you have any idea how many women have stood in this library with similar claims? The help always gets ideas. It is practically a tradition. Welcome back to another powerful story, my beloved listeners. Kindly tell where you are watching from and what time it is where you are at. If you are new here, prepare for a story of betrayal, unexpected love, and what truly makes a family. Drop everything and listen closely. This tale of heartbreak and redemption might just change how you view love and family forever." Vera's hands had been still at her sides. Now they moved, instinctively, to her stomach. She was barely showing, just enough that her work clothes had started to feel wrong against her body. "I am not making a claim. I am telling Elliot the truth about his child. What happens after that is his choice to make." Prudence finally looked up from her fingernails. "What happens after is that you collect your things and leave this property before we have you escorted out. Honestly, Elliot, I told you hiring someone without proper references would end badly. They always get above themselves." The household staff remained motionless near the door. Vera recognized the cook, Mrs. Pemberton, who had given her extra bread from the kitchen on cold mornings when Vera arrived early for restoration work. The woman would not meet her eyes now. No one would meet her eyes. Elliot opened a desk drawer and withdrew a checkbook. The leather was expensive, monogrammed, the kind of object that announced its owner had never worried about money for a single day of his existence. He wrote without speaking, the scratch of his pen the only sound in that enormous room. When he finished, he tore the check free and held it toward Vera without rising from his chair. The gesture itself said everything about how he saw her. She was not worth the effort of standing. "Consider this severance." His voice was flat, businesslike, as though they were concluding a transaction rather than discussing the life growing inside her. "It is more than generous. You will find another position easily enough. You are skilled at what you do." Vera did not take the check. She looked at Elliot's face, searching for some trace of the man who had walked with her through the estate gardens at dusk. The man who had asked about her grandmother's cottage by the sea. The man who had held her hands and spoken about a future she now understood had never existed outside her own imagination. That man was not in this room. Perhaps he had never existed at all. The silence stretched between them like something physical, something with weight. Cordelia shifted in her chair, a small sound of impatience. Prudence returned to examining her manicure. The staff members remained frozen, witnesses to a humiliation they would never acknowledge seeing. "Take the money." Elliot's voice carried an edge now, the first hint of discomfort breaking through his practiced calm. "Handle the situation. There are clinics that manage these things discreetly. I can provide a referral if you need one. Handle the situation." The words landed in Vera's chest like stones dropped into still water, sending ripples of understanding through everything she thought she knew about this man, about herself, about the months they had spent together in stolen hours when his family was away. He was asking her to end the pregnancy. He was offering money to make his problem disappear. And he was doing it in front of his mother, his sister, the household staff, as though Vera were nothing more than an inconvenient piece of business requiring efficient disposal. Something shifted inside her then. Something fundamental and irreversible, like a door closing on a room she would never enter again. Keep your money. The words came from somewhere Vera did not recognize in herself. Her voice was steady now, all the trembling gone, replaced by something harder than she knew she possessed. Keep your family. Keep your name that you are so desperate to protect. This child will have my name, my family, my history, and your absence will be the smallest thing missing from our lives. She turned toward the door, toward the staff members who still would not meet her eyes, toward the long corridor lined with portraits of Mercer ancestors who had looked down on generations of people they considered beneath them. Wait. Cordelia's voice was sharp now, the elegant mask slipping. You cannot simply walk away from this. There are legal considerations, confidentiality agreements. You signed documents when you began working here. I signed documents about the restoration work. I did not sign away my right to raise my own child. Vera kept walking. Her footsteps echoed against the marble floor, steady and unhurried despite the earthquake happening inside her chest. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her run. She would not let them win by watching her crumble. But Prudence's voice followed her down that endless hallway, dripping with the casual cruelty that came from never facing consequences. Do not come crawling back when reality hits and you cannot afford diapers. This is your choice. You walk away now. You walk away forever. Vera did not turn around. She kept walking, kept breathing, kept moving forward even though every step felt like wading through concrete. She made it through the front door she had always used because hired help did not use the family entrance. She made it across the gravel drive to her car, the aging sedan with its dented door and check engine light that never turned off. She sat in the driver's seat and gripped the steering wheel so tight her knuckles went white. The Mercer estate spread before her, all those manicured gardens and ancient trees and wealth accumulated across centuries. She had walked those gardens with Elliot. She had believed, foolishly, naively, that love could bridge any gap between their worlds. The sobs came without warning, tearing out of her throat like something that had been caged too long. She pressed her forehead against the steering wheel and cried for the girl who had believed in fairy tales. For the woman who had thought she saw something real in Elliot's eyes when he touched her face. For the mother she was about to become with nothing but her own strength to rely on. She cried until her ribs ached, until her eyes burned, until there was nothing left inside her but a hollow space where hope used to live. Then she started the car and drove away from the Mercer estate for the last time. The coastal road unwound before her like a ribbon of grey against the darkening sky. Vera drove for 3 hours without stopping, watching the landscape change from wealthy estates to working towns to the wild, windswept terrain of the coast where she had grown up. The smell of salt air began to seep through her car's vents, familiar and grounding, pulling her toward the only place that had never failed her. Her grandmother's cottage sat on a bluff overlooking the Atlantic, the kind of place tourists photographed without understanding the winters that came with such views. The walls were thick stone, built to withstand storms that had drowned better constructed things. 4 generations of Holloway women had been born within those walls, had lived and loved and grieved and carried on within those walls. Vera pulled into the unpaved drive as the last light faded from the sky. She sat in her car for a long moment, gathering whatever strength remained, before walking to the door. Ada Holloway opened it without surprise, as though she had been expecting this exact moment. She was 73 years old with hands that had mended fishing nets and kneaded bread and held dying loved ones. She took one look at her granddaughter's swollen eyes and stepped aside without a word. I made soup. Her voice was matter-of-fact, carrying no judgment. You look like you need soup. They ate in the kitchen that had witnessed 4 generations of Holloway women facing various forms of collapse and reconstruction. The soup was fish stew, thick with potatoes and herbs from the small garden Ada maintained despite her arthritis. Neither woman spoke until the bowls were empty and the tea was poured. How far along? Ada's voice was gentle but direct. 12 weeks. And the father? Vera wrapped her hands around the warm ceramic mug, feeling its heat seep into fingers that had been cold since the library. She thought about Elliot's face when he asked her to handle the situation. She thought about the check he had written without looking at her. She thought about all the words she could use to describe him and found that none of them mattered anymore. There is no father. There is a man who provided genetic material. That is not the same thing. Ada nodded slowly, her weathered hands folded on the table. She had raised Vera's mother alone after a husband who left one winter and never returned. She had raised Vera after her daughter's death from cancer when Vera was 9 years old. The Holloway women had practice at survival. Then we work with what we have. We have always worked with what we have. The words were simple, practical, carrying no drama or self-pity. This was how Ada had approached every crisis Vera could remember. Assess the situation. Identify the resources. Begin the work. Grief and anger were luxuries that could wait until the immediate problems were solved. I do not know how I am going to do this. Vera heard the tremor in her own voice. I do not have savings. I do not have work lined up. I do not have anything except this baby and you and a car that might not survive another winter. Ada reached across the table and took her granddaughter's hands in her own. Her grip was firm despite the knots of arthritis in her joints. You have more than that. You have skills people pay for. You have a roof over your head for as long as you need it. You have me, and I am not going anywhere until I see this grandchild of mine grow up stubborn and strong like every Holloway before her. Or him. Or him. Ada's eyes crinkled with something that might have been a smile. Either way, this baby is going to learn what it means to come from people who do not give up. People who do not need anyone else to tell them their worth. Vera felt tears sliding down her cheeks again, but these were different from the tears she had cried in the Mercer Estate parking lot. These carried something warmer. Something that felt almost like hope. The months that followed took everything Vera possessed and demanded more. Morning sickness arrived like a relentless tide, coming without warning and leaving her exhausted. She learned to keep crackers by her bed, to move slowly when she first woke, to avoid the smell of coffee that had once been her comfort. Some mornings she made it to the bathroom in time. Some mornings she did not. Her professional life contracted like a fist closing. The restoration clients she had cultivated over years of careful work began to drift away when she could not commit to timelines. Word traveled through the small world of textile preservation that Vera Holloway was unavailable, unreliable, dealing with personal matters that made her a risk for major projects. One by one, the inquiries stopped coming. She took whatever work she could find to replace the lost income. Mending fishermen's nets for an old man named Harold whose hands had grown too arthritic for the delicate task. Repairing quilts for the Historical Society at rates that barely covered her materials. Teaching a weekend class on basic textile preservation for the local library, paid in grocery store gift cards rather than actual currency. Her grandmother sold the small boat that had belonged to Vera's grandfather, the one Ada had kept in the harbor for 30 years after his death because she could not bear to part with it. The money from that sale kept them warm through February when the heating oil ran low and the wind came howling off the Atlantic like something alive and angry. Vera studied when she could, borrowing books from the library about advanced preservation techniques she had never had time to master. She read by candlelight when the power flickered, her swelling belly making it harder to find a comfortable position. She taught herself the chemistry of dye stabilization, the physics of fiber deterioration, the history of textile traditions from cultures she would never visit. The knowledge felt like armor she was building for a battle she could not yet see. Her body changed in ways that amazed and frightened her. The slight swell of her stomach became a pronounced curve that altered her center of gravity. Her back ached constantly from the shifting weight. Her ankles swelled in the evenings. Her sleep became fragmented, broken by the need to use the bathroom and by dreams she could never quite remember upon waking. She talked to the baby during quiet moments, her hands resting on the taut skin of her belly. You will never wonder if you are wanted. The words became a litany, a promise she repeated until it felt carved into her bones. You will never doubt that you are enough. Whatever we have together. That is more than most people ever find. The baby moved for the first time in her 5th month, a flutter so gentle she thought she imagined it. Then it came again, stronger, undeniable. Life announcing itself from within. She called for Ada, who came into the room and placed her weathered hand on Vera's stomach. They waited together in silence until the baby moved again, a small kick against Ada's palm. Strong one. Ada's voice was thick with emotion she rarely showed. Like all the Holloway women. This baby is going to be just fine. Spring came slowly to the coast, the grey of winter giving way to muted greens and the first tentative wildflowers. Vera's due date approached with the relentless certainty of all natural things. The midwife, a woman named Margaret who had delivered half the babies in the village, stopped by regularly to check on Vera's progress. She taught Ada how to recognize the signs of labor, how to time contractions, what to do if something went wrong before she could arrive. Everything looks healthy. Margaret's voice was reassuring during the final examination before the due date. This baby is positioned well. Your body knows what to do. Trust it. But the baby arrived during a storm, because Holloway women never did anything the easy way. The power went out across half the village as wind and rain battered the coast. Ada lit candles and lanterns, filling the cottage with flickering golden light that made shadows dance on the stone walls. Margaret arrived just as the first real contractions began, her rain slicker dripping on the floor, her medical bag clutched tight against her chest. The labor was long and difficult. Vera lost track of time, lost track of everything except the waves of pain that crashed through her body and the sound of her grandmother's voice whispering encouragement. Ada recited names during the hardest hours. Names of Holloway women stretching back generations, a litany of survival that had brought them to this moment. Your great-great-grandmother Elizabeth came to this coast with nothing but the clothes on her back. She raised 4 children alone when her husband drowned in a fishing accident. Your great-grandmother Rose worked in the cannery 14 hours a day to keep this cottage standing. Your grandmother Julia, my mother, taught herself to read at 40 so she could help her children with their schoolwork. Your mother Sarah fought cancer for 3 years and never once complained. You come from women who do not give up. You come from women who survive. Vera screamed through the final contractions, her hands gripping Ada's so tight she left bruises. And then, in the hush between one moment and the next, a new voice filled the cottage. The baby was small, with dark eyes that seemed to carry knowledge beyond her hours of existence. Margaret placed her on Vera's chest, still wet and wailing, and something fundamental shifted in the universe. Vera held her daughter and felt the last remnants of her connection to Elliot Mercer dissolve like morning mist. This child was hers. Completely, entirely, irrevocably hers. Whatever DNA she shared with the man who had rejected her, this baby belonged to the Holloway women. She would carry their name, their history, their stubborn refusal to be diminished by anyone. Rosemary. Vera whispered the name she had chosen months ago. Rosemary Ada Holloway. Ada stood beside the bed, tears streaming down her weathered face. She reached out one gnarled finger and touched her great-granddaughter's cheek. Welcome to the family, little one. Welcome to the hardest, best family you could ever belong to. The storm raged on outside, but inside the cottage, surrounded by candlelight and love and generations of women who had faced worse than this and survived, Vera made a silent promise to the tiny person in her arms. Your father just made the biggest mistake of his life. And someday, when you are grown and strong and unstoppable, he is going to realize exactly what he threw away. The first year of Rosemary's life taught Vera things about herself she had never known. She learned she could function on 3 hours of sleep. She learned to work with a baby strapped to her chest, mending delicate fabrics while Rosemary dozed against her heartbeat. She learned that the weight of another person's complete dependence could be crushing and liberating at the same time. Ada became the foundation that made everything else possible. She took the night feedings when Vera needed to recover from long days of work. She sang old songs to Rosemary in a language she had learned from her own grandmother, songs about the sea and the stars and women who refused to be broken. She reminded Vera to eat when exhaustion stole her appetite, reminded her to sleep when worry kept her awake, reminded her that asking for help was not the same as admitting weakness. The small victories accumulated like drops of water filling a vessel. A quilt repair that led to a referral from a satisfied customer. A historical society presentation that caught the attention of a curator visiting from the city. An article about traditional coastal textile preservation that mentioned Vera's weekend classes at the library. When Rosemary was 8 months old, a letter arrived from a regional museum. A curator there had seen samples of Vera's restoration work and wanted to discuss a potential consultation. The project was small, a colonial-era sampler that needed stabilization before it could be displayed. The pay was modest but real. Vera read the letter 3 times, certain she was misunderstanding something. Then she called the number at the bottom and scheduled the appointment. Leaving Rosemary with Ada for the day felt like tearing off a piece of her own body. She checked on the baby 17 times before she was out of the driveway, giving Ada instructions about feeding and napping and what to do if Rosemary seemed upset. She will be fine. Ada's voice carried patient amusement. I have raised children before. Go do what you need to do. Show them what a Holloway woman is capable of. The consultation went better than Vera dared to hope. The curator was impressed by her technical knowledge, by her careful approach to the damaged sampler, by the confidence that came from years of self-taught expertise combined with genuine passion for the work. "When can you start?" The words were matter-of-fact, businesslike, but to Vera they sounded like music. She started the following week. She completed the restoration ahead of schedule, documenting every step of the process, explaining her decisions in detailed reports that demonstrated the depth of her understanding. The curator recommended her to a colleague at another institution. That colleague recommended her to someone else. The cascade had begun. By Rosemary's second birthday, Vera had completed restoration projects for 3 regional museums. Her name appeared in a preservation journal, cited as a source for an article about colonial-era needlework techniques. Other professionals began reaching out to consult on challenging projects, recognizing her as someone with rare skills and even rarer dedication. She moved out of Ada's cottage when Rosemary was 3, renting a small house in the village where she could set up a proper workspace. But she visited every week, sometimes more often, and Ada remained the steady presence that anchored both of them. Rosemary grew like the wildflowers that bloomed on the coastal bluffs, hardy and beautiful and utterly herself. She learned to walk on the windswept beaches, her small feet leaving prints in wet sand that the tide would wash away. She learned to talk in complete sentences earlier than most children, asking questions about everything she saw. She learned that her family was her mother and her great-grandmother and the neighbors who brought casseroles when times were hard. She never asked about her father. Not once. The question simply did not occur to her, because absence was not the same as loss. She had never known Elliot Mercer, had never expected him, had no hole in her life shaped like his presence. For Vera, this was the greatest victory of all. The years accumulated like layers of sediment, each one adding depth and texture to the life she was building. Rosemary started school and proved herself to be the kind of student teachers remember long after they have retired. She excelled at art, producing drawings and paintings that showed remarkable technical skill for her age. She excelled at observation, noticing details that adults overlooked, asking questions that cut to the heart of things. She had her mother's careful hands. She had her great-grandmother's stubborn practicality. She had her father's mouth, the particular way of holding her lips when she was concentrating, but Vera saw this echo and loved her daughter through it rather than despite it. Vera's reputation continued to grow in quiet, steady increments. When Rosemary was 5, Vera received her first invitation to lecture at a professional conference. When Rosemary was 6, her work was featured in a documentary about American textile preservation. When Rosemary was 7, other experts began citing her methods in their own publications, acknowledging her as an authority in her specialized field. The woman who had stood in the Mercer Estate Library in work clothes, dismissed as opportunistic help with ideas above her station, had become someone whose opinion was sought by the most prestigious institutions in her profession. The transformation had happened so gradually that Vera sometimes forgot to be amazed by it. But Ada noticed. Ada always noticed. "You built this yourself," her grandmother said one evening, watching Vera review a contract for a major museum consultation. From nothing, from rejection, from a broken heart and an empty bank account. "You built something real. I had help." Vera looked up from the paperwork. "I could not have done any of this without you. You had support." Ada's voice was firm. "Support is not the same as help. I kept the lights on while you did the work. I held the baby while you earned the money. But the work itself, the expertise, the reputation, that came from you. Nobody gave you that. Nobody can take it away." The words settled into Vera like stones dropped into deep water. She thought about Elliot Mercer, about the library where he had laughed at her, about the check he had written without looking at her face. She wondered sometimes what had become of him, whether he ever thought about the child he had refused to acknowledge. But these thoughts were rare now, and they passed quickly, leaving no lasting disturbance in the calm surface of her life. She had more important things to think about. Rosemary's 7th birthday arrived in early April, just as the last winter storms were giving way to the uncertain warmth of coastal spring. They celebrated at Ada's cottage with a cake that Ada had baked despite her arthritis, and Vera gave her daughter a set of professional quality watercolor paints. "Because you are ready for them." Vera watched Rosemary's face light up with joy. "Your drawings have outgrown the supplies I have been buying you. It is time to let your work grow into what it wants to become." Rosemary painted her first watercolor that afternoon, a study of seabirds she observed from the bluff behind Ada's cottage. The work showed surprising technical control for a 7-year-old, an understanding of color and movement that could not be taught but only nurtured. Vera kept that painting. She would keep all of them. The question came on an ordinary morning 3 months after Rosemary's birthday, delivered with the casual directness that characterized everything her daughter said. They were in the kitchen. Vera was making pancakes, her movements automatic from years of weekend ritual. Rosemary sat at the counter, watching her mother with an intensity that Vera had learned to recognize as the precursor to something important. "Mama." Rosemary's voice was thoughtful rather than troubled. "Why do I not have a father?" Vera's hands stilled over the mixing bowl. She had prepared for this moment since before Rosemary was born, had practiced responses with a therapist she saw once a month in the city, had promised herself she would never lie about anything important. But preparation did not make reality easier. She set down the whisk carefully and walked around the counter to sit on the stool next to her daughter, bringing them to eye level. Rosemary's dark eyes met hers with the patient expectation of someone who trusted completely that her questions would be answered. "You do have a father. Everyone has a biological father." Vera chose her words with precision, offering information without overwhelming. "But your father and I knew each other before you were born. When I told him I was pregnant, he was not ready to be a parent. He made a choice not to be part of our family. So I raised you with Gran. That is the truth, baby." Rosemary absorbed this with characteristic thoughtfulness, her brain visibly working through implications. "Did he not want me because I did something wrong?" The question drove into Vera's chest like a blade. She cupped her daughter's face, needing Rosemary to see absolute truth in her eyes. "Oh, sweetheart, no. This had absolutely nothing to do with you. You were not even born yet. His choice was about his own fears, his own limitations. It was never ever about you not being enough or lovable. You are the most wanted child in the world. I chose you over everything. Every single day I choose you." Rosemary considered this for a long moment. "But kids at school have moms and dads. The books always show families with both. Are we different because we only have you?" Her voice was small now, uncertain in ways Rosemary rarely allowed herself to be. Vera felt her heart crack along fault lines she had not known existed. Some families have 2 parents. Some have 1. Some have grandparents raising kids, or aunts and uncles, or people who are not related at all. There is no single way a family has to look. Vera reached for her daughter's hands. "Our family has me, and Gran, and you. That is our family. It is different from some families, but it is not less than. It is exactly what we need." The tension in Rosemary's shoulders eased slightly. Kids talk about their dads teaching them sports or fixing things or camping. I never know what to say. I just pretend I am not listening. The image of her daughter feeling isolated by classmates' casual conversations about their fathers made Vera's protective instincts surge into full force. "Has anyone been mean about this? Made you feel bad about our family?" "No. Nobody is mean. But I feel like I am keeping a secret sometimes. Like there is something different about us I cannot explain." Rosemary leaned into her mother, allowing herself to be held in ways she usually claimed she was too big for. "There is nothing wrong with us." Vera whispered the words into her daughter's hair. "Nothing. Our family is strong and full of love and completely whole. Any kid would be lucky to have what you have." They sat like that for a long moment, mother and daughter, neither wanting to break the connection. When Rosemary finally pulled back, her expression had shifted into something Vera recognized. Determination layered over hurt. "I do not think I want to meet him. Our father. If he did not want us then, I do not need him now. You and Gran are enough." Rosemary's voice carried an edge of anger Vera had never heard from her gentle daughter. "That is your choice, baby. That is completely valid, and I support you. You do not owe him anything, including forgiveness or curiosity. If you never want to know him, that is okay." Vera meant every word, even as something in her chest tightened with the weight of decisions that were no longer entirely hers to make. The autumn that followed Rosemary's 7th birthday brought changes Vera had not anticipated. Her reputation had reached a level where she no longer needed to pursue work. Work pursued her. Inquiries arrived from institutions across the country, from private collectors with pieces that required expert care, from other professionals seeking collaboration or consultation. She could choose her projects now, selecting only the work that genuinely interested her, that challenged her skills, that paid well enough to provide genuine security. She and Rosemary moved to a larger house with a proper studio space where Vera could work on major restoration projects without disrupting their daily life. The house had a garden where Rosemary could paint, a room for Ada when she visited, a sense of permanence that felt earned rather than inherited. Financial security arrived quietly, without fanfare. Not wealth, exactly, but comfort. The ability to say yes to things that mattered and no to things that did not. The freedom to be sick without catastrophe, to take vacations without guilt, to buy Rosemary art supplies without checking the bank balance first. Ada visited one weekend and stood in the doorway of the new house, looking at everything Vera had built. "Your mother would be so proud." Ada's voice was thick with emotion she rarely showed. "She always knew you were meant for something big. She just did not live long enough to see it." Vera wrapped her arms around her grandmother, feeling the fragile bones beneath papery skin, aware in ways she had not been before that Ada would not be here forever. "I could not have done any of this without you. You would have found a way." Ada patted her granddaughter's back. "You Holloway women always find a way." The phone call that changed everything arrived on an ordinary Thursday in October. Vera was in her studio examining a 17th-century altar cloth that had been damaged in a church fire. The work was delicate and demanding, requiring complete concentration, and she almost let the call go to voicemail. But something made her answer. Dr. Holloway. The voice belonged to the director of the Pemberton Museum of American History, a prestigious institution she had worked with twice before. "We have acquired a significant piece for our textile collection. 17th century English, exceptional provenance. The previous owner's family commissioned it, and it has been in private hands until now. We need your expertise for the authentication and preservation work." Vera asked the questions a professional would ask. The age of the piece. The condition. The timeline for display. The budget for conservation work. She did not ask who the previous owner had been. Some instinct warned her that she did not want to know. "The Mercer family is donating it as part of their estate restructuring." The director's voice was casual, unaware of the earthquake his words triggered. "Quite a coup for us, actually. The piece has never been publicly displayed. They have been very private about their collection." Vera's hand tightened on her phone. The name Mercer landed in her consciousness like a stone thrown through glass, shattering the careful calm she had built over 10 years of deliberate forgetting. "I will need to see it before I can commit to the project." She was amazed her voice emerged steady. "Of course. Could you come next week? We are organizing a preliminary showing for the conservation team." The director paused. "I should mention, the family has requested to be present for the authentication. Something about maintaining connection to the piece's history. Mr. Mercer specifically asked to attend." The years collapsed into nothing. Vera was standing in the library again, watching Elliot laugh, watching him write a check, watching him dismiss the life growing inside her like it was a problem requiring efficient disposal. "That will not affect my work." The words came from somewhere outside herself. "I will see you Tuesday." She ended the call and sat for a long time in the silence of her studio, her hands resting on the damaged altar cloth, her mind racing through possibilities she had never allowed herself to consider. Elliot Mercer wanted to be present for the authentication. Elliot Mercer had asked specifically to attend. He knew. He must know that she was the expert the museum had contacted. He must have seen her name in professional publications, must have tracked her rise from dismissed hired help to respected authority in her field. He must have done the math, must have wondered about the child she carried when she walked out of his library 10 years ago. Or perhaps he had not thought about her at all until now. Perhaps seeing her name attached to his family's donation was simply an unexpected intersection of worlds that should have remained separate. Either way, she would have to face him. She would have to stand in the same room with the man who had laughed at her, who had offered money to make her disappear, who had never once tried to find out what happened to the daughter he denied. Vera looked around her studio, at the evidence of everything she had built since that terrible day in the Mercer Estate Library. The diplomas on her walls. The photographs of completed restorations. The awards and certificates acknowledging her expertise. She thought about Rosemary, about her daughter's fierce declaration that she did not need a father who had not wanted her. She thought about Ada, about generations of Holloway women who had faced worse than this and survived. Then she picked up her phone and texted her assistant to clear her schedule for the following Tuesday. She would go to the museum. She would examine the tapestry. She would do the work she was hired to do with the professionalism that had built her reputation. And if Elliot Mercer thought he could shake her simply by being present, he was about to discover exactly how wrong he was. The Pemberton Museum occupied a converted textile mill at the edge of a river that had once powered machines for making cotton thread. Vera arrived early on Tuesday morning, wanting to see the tapestry before anyone else arrived, wanting to ground herself in work before the confrontation she knew was coming. The conservation laboratory was in the basement of the mill, a climate-controlled space with filtered light and specialized equipment. Vera had worked here twice before and knew the layout, the staff, the particular smell of preservation chemicals that lingered in the air. The tapestry was laid out on a long examination table, and even from the doorway, Vera could see the quality of the workmanship. It depicted a garden scene, figures in Elizabethan dress surrounded by flowers that were botanically precise despite their decorative purpose. The colors had faded but retained their essential character. The fabric needed cleaning, stabilization in several areas, and careful documentation before any restoration could begin. She lost herself in the examination for nearly 2 hours, taking photographs, making notes, identifying areas of damage and their likely causes. The work was absorbing in the way her work always was, demanding complete attention, leaving no space for anxiety or anticipation. She was examining the lower corner, where water damage had weakened the weave, when she heard footsteps behind her. "I was not sure you would come." The voice was different than she remembered. It carried weight now, a quality of exhaustion that had not been there in the library of his estate a decade earlier. Vera did not turn around immediately. She finished her examination of the damaged section, made a note in her documentation, and only then straightened to face him. Elliot Mercer looked older than 10 years should have made him. His hair had grayed at the temples. Lines around his eyes suggested sleeplessness rather than laughter. He stood in the doorway of the conservation laboratory like a man who had forgotten how to enter rooms with confidence. She remembered him as polished, certain, performing for his family with casual ease. The man before her looked diminished in ways that went beyond physical aging. Something fundamental had changed in him, something she could see but not yet name. "I came for the work." Vera's voice was steady, professional, giving nothing away. "The tapestry is remarkable. It belonged to my great-grandmother. She was the only person in my family who ever—" He stopped himself, looking at the floor rather than at Vera. "I am sorry. I do not have the right to share family stories with you. I lost that right." The acknowledgement hung in the air between them, unexpected and unsettling. Vera had prepared for confrontation, for defensiveness, for the entitled dismissal she remembered from their last encounter. She had not prepared for this. The water damage is significant but not irreparable. She returned her attention to the tapestry, refusing to let him see how much his presence affected her. "I will need approximately 3 months for full restoration. My preliminary report will include cost estimates and a timeline for each phase." "Vera." She did not respond. "I saw her." Elliot's voice was quiet, stripped of everything but raw vulnerability. "Your daughter. I saw a photograph in the art section of the regional paper. Her school won some kind of competition for their youth exhibition. She was standing next to a watercolor of seabirds." Vera's hands had been steady throughout her examination. They trembled now, almost imperceptibly, as she set down her magnifying glass. "She has your mouth," Elliot continued, his voice cracking. "The way you hold your lips when you are concentrating." She was concentrating on something the photographer was saying, and I knew. Immediately. Completely. "She is mine." "No." The word came out with a sharpness that surprised even Vera. "She is not yours. She belongs to herself. And she has been raised by me, in my home, with my grandmother's hands teaching her and my name protecting her. You do not get to claim her because you recognized something in a newspaper photograph." "I am not claiming anything." Elliot's face crumbled. "I am acknowledging what I destroyed." The silence that followed was thick with 10 years of accumulated pain, missed opportunities, choices that could never be unmade. Vera looked at this man who had once been her world and felt something she had not expected. Pity. Not forgiveness. Not softening. But a recognition that his suffering was real, even if it changed nothing about what he had done. I have spent 10 years trying to understand how I became capable of what I did in that library. Elliot's voice was barely above a whisper. How I let my mother and sister speak to you that way. How I sat there and wrote a check like you were a contractor I was dismissing. And what have you concluded? That I was a coward. That I was weak. That everything I believed about my family and my position and what I deserved was a lie I told myself to avoid becoming someone real. Elliot's hands hung at his sides, empty, offering nothing. My mother died 2 years ago. My sister has not spoken to me since I sold most of the estate. I am donating what remains of value because I cannot bear to keep things that remind me of who I was. Vera should have felt satisfaction. She had imagined this moment in her lowest hours, had pictured Elliot Mercer broken and begging, had constructed elaborate fantasies of revenge that felt righteous and deserved. The reality was nothing like those fantasies. She felt the vast emptiness that remains after fire has burned everything there was to burn. Elliot's confession gave her nothing she needed. His suffering did not heal her wounds. His understanding of his own cruelty did not undo the years she had spent rebuilding from the ashes of his rejection. I do not need your confession. Vera's voice was tired now, drained of the anger she had carried for so long. I do not need your guilt or your transformation or your awareness of what you lost. I needed those things 10 years ago, when I was pregnant and terrified and alone. Now I need you to step aside so I can complete my examination of this tapestry. Elliot stepped aside. Vera continued her work as though he were not there, though she felt his presence like heat from a nearby flame. An hour passed. 2. The museum staff came and went, giving the two of them careful space, clearly aware that something significant was unfolding in their conservation laboratory. Finally, as the afternoon light began to fade, Elliot spoke again. I am not asking you to forgive me. I am not asking for anything. I just want you to know that I am here. That if she ever wants to know where she came from, if she ever has questions, I will answer them. I will tell her the truth about what I did and why I do not deserve to know her. I will give her whatever closure she needs, even if that closure is walking away from me without a word. Vera turned to look at him for the first time since their initial exchange. That is not your decision to make. It is not my decision either. Rosemary will decide for herself, when she is old enough, whether your existence means anything to her. Until then, you are a stranger who shares her genetics. Nothing more. I understand. Do you? Vera's voice carried years of compressed fury. Do you understand that she has never felt your absence? That she is happy and loved and completely whole without you? That your presence would introduce instability into a life that requires no additional complications? I understand that you built something extraordinary from what I destroyed. Elliot's eyes filled with tears he did not attempt to hide. I understand that my daughter is who she is because you protected her from becoming who I was. I understand that I will spend the rest of my life knowing I missed everything that mattered. Vera gathered her tools, her notes, her professional composure. The restoration will take 3 months. You do not need to be present for any of it. I will submit my reports to the museum director. We do not need to speak again. She left the laboratory without looking back, her footsteps echoing against industrial floors that had witnessed a century of labor before she was born. The drive home took 3 hours, and Vera spent every minute processing what had happened. She had expected the encounter with Elliot to resolve something, to provide closure or vindication, or at least the satisfaction of seeing him humbled. Instead, she felt hollowed out, as though the anger she had carried for 10 years had been a load-bearing wall that was suddenly gone, leaving nothing but empty space. She stopped at an overlook where the coastal road curved around a cliff, and she sat in her car watching the ocean move beneath her. The water was grey today, churning with approaching weather, endless and indifferent to human drama. Elliot had changed. She could not deny that. The man in the conservation laboratory was not the same person who had laughed at her in his family's library. He had lost his mother, lost his relationship with his sister, sold his inheritance, spent years apparently trying to understand his own capacity for cruelty. But what did any of that mean for her? What did his transformation require from her, if anything? She thought about Rosemary, about the fierce declaration that she did not need a father who had not wanted her. She thought about the stability they had built, the completeness of their family unit, the absence that had never felt like absence because it had always been normal. Introducing Elliot into that equation would change everything. Even if Rosemary ultimately rejected him, Even if his presence was unwanted and temporary, the fact of him would create ripples that could not be undone. Her daughter would have to process not just the existence of a father, but the story of his rejection, the evidence of his regret, the complexity of a person who was both the villain of their history and someone apparently trying to become better. Was that fair to ask of a 10-year-old girl who had never felt lacking for anything? Was it fair to make that choice for her? Vera did not have answers. She only had questions that would keep her awake for months. When she finally pulled into her driveway, the house was lit from within, warm and welcoming. Ada's car was parked at the curb. They had planned dinner together, a regular occurrence that had become one of the anchors of their family life. Vera sat in her car for a long moment, composing herself before going inside. She could hear laughter through the closed windows, Rosemary's bright giggle and Ada's lower chuckle. They were happy in there, complete, untroubled by the collision that had just occurred in a museum conservation laboratory. She could protect that happiness. She could decide that Elliot's transformation was not her responsibility, that his desires did not create obligations for her, that Rosemary's stability mattered more than his need for redemption. She could also be honest. She could acknowledge that her daughter might have questions someday that could only be answered by the man who had walked away before she was born. She could trust that the foundation they had built was strong enough to withstand complexity, nuance, the introduction of difficult truths. She did not know yet which path she would choose. But as she walked toward her front door, toward the laughter and warmth waiting inside, she knew that something fundamental had shifted. The wall she had built between her family and Elliot Mercer had developed a crack. What grew through that crack was not yet visible. But it was coming. The winter that followed the museum encounter was one of the harshest in coastal memory. Vera completed the restoration of the Mercer tapestry in the climate-controlled laboratory, working early mornings and late evenings when she was least likely to encounter anyone associated with the donor family. The work was satisfying in its demands, requiring complete focus, leaving no space for the complicated thoughts that plagued her during quieter moments. Elliot did not appear. He did not send messages. He did not attempt contact of any kind. At first, Vera interpreted this as respect for the boundaries she had established. Then she began to wonder if it was something else. Cowardice perhaps, or strategic withdrawal, or the simple reality that his dramatic confession had exhausted whatever genuine emotion had produced it. She learned through museum staff that Elliot had made a substantial anonymous donation to the institution's textile preservation fund. The money came with no conditions, no publicity requirements, no requests for recognition. It was simply given, as though someone wanted to contribute without expecting anything in return. She did not know what to make of this. Rosemary continued to thrive in the uncomplicated way of children whose foundations are secure. She painted obsessively through the winter months, producing watercolors that showed increasing sophistication and emotional depth. Her teachers began suggesting that her work might be submitted to youth art competitions, that her talent warranted special attention and cultivation. Vera encouraged this without pushing. She had learned from her own journey that genuine skill developed best when supported rather than pressured. She bought Rosemary better supplies, arranged for lessons with a retired art professor who lived in the village, created space in their home where creative work could happen without interruption. She did not tell Rosemary about the encounter with Elliot. She did not know how to explain what she herself did not understand. Spring arrived late and sudden, winter releasing its grip in a matter of days rather than weeks. The coastal village emerged from hibernation with a particular energy of places that survive harsh seasons. Neighbors who had been confined to their homes reappeared in gardens and on porches. The fishing boats went out again. Life resumed its normal patterns. Rosemary School announced that students from their art program had been selected for a regional youth exhibition. Her watercolor of seabirds, the one she had painted on her 7th birthday at Ada's cottage, would be displayed alongside work from students across 4 counties. The exhibition would be held at the Pemberton Museum. Vera stared at the announcement letter for a long time, her mind racing through implications. The same museum where she had restored the Mercer tapestry. The same institution where Elliot had stood watching her work, confessing his regrets, asking for possibilities she had not granted. She could decline. She could explain to Rosemary that there was a scheduling conflict, that they would find other opportunities to display her work, that this particular exhibition was not the right fit. But that would be a lie. And Vera had promised herself, had promised Rosemary, that she would never lie about anything important. She signed the permission form and returned it to the school. The exhibition was scheduled for the evening of the winter solstice, the longest night of the year. Vera spent the weeks leading up to it preparing in ways she could not quite articulate. She bought a new dress, something elegant but understated, the kind of clothing that announced she belonged without begging for validation. She scheduled extra sessions with her therapist, processing the complicated emotions that the event stirred. She did not know if Elliot would attend. The exhibition was open to the public. Anyone could walk through those gallery doors. She told herself it did not matter. She told herself that whatever happened, she was prepared. The evening arrived with clear skies and bitter cold, the kind of weather that made breath visible and stars sharp. The museum had transformed its main gallery into something approaching elegance. Soft lighting, careful arrangements, small crowds of families and educators examining the work of young artists who were taking their first steps toward public recognition. Rosemary's watercolor occupied one corner of the youth art section. She stood beside it in her best dress, explaining her process to anyone who asked, glowing with a pride that made Vera's heart ache with love. This was what mattered. This moment, this accomplishment, this child who had grown into someone remarkable despite every obstacle that should have held her back. Vera moved through the gallery accepting compliments on her daughter's work, fielding questions from other parents who recognized her as a professional in the field. She was gracious, present, genuinely engaged with the conversations happening around her. But part of her attention was always scanning the room. She noticed him before he saw her. Elliot stood near the entrance, partially hidden by a structural pillar, his face wet with tears. He was watching Rosemary, watching this daughter he had never met stand beside her artwork and receive the admiration of strangers. He looked destroyed in a way that went beyond what Vera had witnessed in the conservation laboratory. This was not regret or guilt or the intellectual understanding of loss. This was a man confronting the visceral reality of what he had thrown away. Their eyes met across the crowded gallery. Elliot did not wave. He did not smile. He did not move toward her or attempt any kind of contact. He simply stood there, tears streaming down his face, acknowledging that he was witnessing something beautiful that did not belong to him. Then Rosemary noticed him. She turned from a conversation with another family, her attention caught by something in the crowd. Her eyes found Elliot, studied him for a long moment with a careful observation that characterized everything she did. She looked at his face. She looked at the particular way he stood. She looked at his mouth. Then she walked back to her mother's side. Someone is crying near the entrance. Rosemary's voice was quiet, meant only for Vera. He looks sad. Vera's heart contracted. Yes, he does. He was looking at me, at my painting, and then at me. Did that bother you? Rosemary considered the question with characteristic thoughtfulness. Not really. People look at art all the time. And people look at me because I am standing next to art I made. That is normal. She paused, her expression shifting into something more complex. Mama. That man has the same mouth as me. Is he my father? The question landed gently, almost casually, as though Rosemary had been waiting to ask and had chosen this moment for reasons only she understood. Vera looked at her daughter, at this incredible person who had grown from the wreckage of rejection into something strong and beautiful and complete. Yes, she said. He is. The gallery noise continued around them, other families examining artwork, conversations about technique and color and the particular pride that comes from seeing children create. None of it touched Vera and Rosemary, who stood in a bubble of silence that seemed to separate them from everything else in the room. Rosemary's dark eyes moved from her mother's face back to the man standing near the entrance. She studied him with the same careful attention she brought to everything, cataloging details, processing information, reaching conclusions at her own pace. Does he want something from us? The question was practical rather than emotional, the kind of assessment Rosemary applied to problems that needed solving. He wants to know you. Vera chose her words with precision, aware that whatever she said now would shape how her daughter understood this moment for the rest of her life. He was not ready to be a parent when I was pregnant with you, and now he wishes he had been. He is sad about what he missed. Rosemary absorbed this information in silence. Her expression did not crumble or harden. She simply processed, the way she always did, fitting new knowledge into the framework of understanding she had already built. That is his problem, not mine. The words came out matter-of-fact, carrying no anger or grief, just the simple recognition of a boundary that required no defense because it had never been breached. I do not feel sad about it. Should I feel sad about it? You should feel whatever you actually feel. There is no right answer. Rosemary nodded slowly, her attention drifting back to Elliot for a moment before returning to her mother. I feel hungry. Can we get something from the reception table? Vera laughed. The sound surprised her, emerging without bitterness or pain, carrying only the pure relief of a mother watching her child demonstrate the emotional security she had worked so hard to provide. Yes. We can get something from the reception table. They walked together through the gallery, past the tapestry Vera had restored, past the watercolor Rosemary had painted, past the patrons and the curators and the crying man who would never stop watching from a distance. Rosemary selected fruit and cheese with the serious attention she brought to everything. She asked questions about a sculpture she had noticed earlier, about the lighting techniques the museum used, about whether Vera thought her next painting should be larger or smaller than the seabird piece. Normal conversation. Normal evening. Normal life continuing as though nothing extraordinary had just occurred. Vera stood beside her daughter and felt something she had not expected to feel on this particular night. Peace. Not because Elliot had appeared. Not because he was suffering. Not because his family's fortune had declined or his mother had died or his sister had abandoned him. Peace because she had built a life so complete that his presence created no disruption. Peace because her daughter stood beside her, healthy and loved and utterly unconcerned with the man weeping at the edge of the room. Peace because the promises she had made in a candlelit bedroom during a storm had been kept, every single one, through years of work and sacrifice and stubborn refusal to accept less than what she deserved. Elliot remained near the entrance as the gallery began to empty. Families gathered their children. Staff members began the quiet work of closing the exhibition for the night. The crowds thinned until only a handful of people remained. He did not approach. He did not speak. He did not attempt any kind of contact. He simply watched and wept and eventually disappeared into the longest night of the year. Vera noticed his departure without comment. She helped Rosemary gather a few items from the reception table to take home, thanked the museum staff for including her daughter's work, and walked out into the bitter cold of the winter evening. The car was warm within minutes, the heating system reliable in ways her old sedan had never been. Rosemary settled into the passenger seat with her collection of snacks and the satisfied exhaustion of someone who had just accomplished something important. They drove in comfortable silence for several miles, the coastal road unwinding before them like a ribbon of grey beneath the stars. Mama. Yes, baby. I am glad I know now. About him. It was weird not knowing, even though I did not really think about it that much. Now I know and I can stop wondering. Vera glanced at her daughter, searching for signs of distress or confusion. She found only the calm certainty that characterized Rosemary's approach to everything. Do you have questions? Things you want to know about him? Rosemary considered this for a long moment. Maybe someday. Not right now. Right now I just want to go home and show Gran my painting and eat the rest of this cheese. That sounds like an excellent plan. They arrived home to find Ada waiting with hot chocolate and the particular kind of attention that grandmothers provide when they sense something significant has occurred. She did not ask questions immediately, simply took Rosemary's coat and admired the program from the exhibition and listened to the animated description of the evening. Later, after Rosemary was asleep in her room with her exhibition ribbon displayed on the nightstand, Ada found Vera sitting in the kitchen with a cup of tea that had long since gone cold. She saw him. She asked if he was her father. I told her the truth. Ada sat down across from her granddaughter, her weathered hands folded on the table. And how did she take it? Like she takes everything. Calmly. Practically. She said it was his problem, not hers. Smart girl. Gets that from her mother. Vera smiled despite the exhaustion weighing on her. He cried the entire time. Just stood there watching her and crying. He never approached, never tried to speak to her. Just watched. Good. Ada's voice was firm. He does not have the right to approach. He lost that right 10 years ago. I know. But seeing him there, seeing how destroyed he looked, I expected to feel satisfied. Vindicated. Something. And instead I felt nothing. Or almost nothing. Just tired. Like this thing I have been carrying for so long has finally been set down and now I do not know what to do with my hands. Ada reached across the table and took Vera's hands in her own. That is grief, child. Not for him. For the years you spent angry. Anger takes energy. When it leaves, You feel the space where it used to be. What am I supposed to do with that space? Fill it with something better. Ada's eyes crinkled with something approaching a smile. You have spent 10 years proving you did not need him. Now you get to spend the rest of your life discovering what you actually want. The weeks following the exhibition settled into something approaching normalcy, though Vera could feel the subtle shifts beneath the surface. Rosemary did not bring up her father again, but she seemed more thoughtful than usual, spending longer hours in her room with her art supplies, producing paintings that showed a new depth of emotional complexity. One piece depicted a figure standing alone at the edge of the ocean, back turned to the viewer, facing something beyond the frame that the viewer could not see. Vera recognized the processing happening in her daughter's work and did not interrupt it. Rosemary would talk when she was ready. Pushing would only create resistance. The restoration of the Mercer tapestry was complete now, installed in the museum's permanent collection with a placard crediting Vera for the conservation work. She received invitations to lecture about the project, to write articles about the techniques she had used, to consult on similar pieces held by other institutions. Her career continued its steady ascent, unaffected by the personal drama that had intersected with her professional life. This separation felt important to Vera, proof that she had built something solid enough to withstand complications. The letter arrived in early February, delivered with the regular mail as though it were any ordinary correspondence. The handwriting on the envelope was unfamiliar, but the return address was not. Mercer, with no first name, and an address she did not recognize, something that was clearly not the family estate. Vera held the envelope for a long time before opening it. The letter inside was handwritten on plain paper, not the expensive stationery she would have expected from someone of Elliot's background. The words were careful, chosen with obvious deliberation. Dear Vera, I am writing because I promised myself I would not contact you again, and breaking promises seems to be the only thing I have ever been good at. But I need you to know some things, and a letter felt less intrusive than appearing at your home or your workplace. I saw her at the exhibition. I saw Rosemary. I saw the painting she created and the way she stood beside it with such confidence and pride. I saw her look at me and recognize something in my face that she sees in her own mirror. I want you to know that I understand now. Not the way I thought I understood before, when I stood in the museum laboratory confessing my regrets. That was still about me. About my guilt and my need for absolution and my desperate hope that acknowledging my failures would somehow earn me something I do not deserve. Seeing her, really seeing her, changed everything. She is extraordinary. Not because of anything I contributed, but because of everything you gave her. The confidence. The talent. The absolute security of knowing she is loved. Those things came from you. From your grandmother. From the family you built when I walked away. I am not writing to ask for anything. I am writing to tell you that I am stepping back completely. I will not appear at events where she might be. I will not lurk at the edges of her life hoping for glimpses. I will not burden you with my presence or my needs. If she ever wants to know me, if she ever has questions that only I can answer, I will be here. You have my contact information. You can share it with her when and if you think appropriate. But I am done making this about me. You won. Not because you defeated me, but because you became something I could never touch. Something whole and complete and beautiful. The life you built does not need me. Rosemary does not need me. That is not a tragedy. That is a testament to who you are. I am sorry. Those words are worthless, I know. But they are all I have left to give. Elliot. Vera read the letter 3 times, then folded it carefully and placed it in the locked box in her closet where she kept important documents. Birth certificates, property deeds, the first photograph ever taken of Rosemary, wrapped in tissue paper. She did not know if she would ever show the letter to her daughter. That was a decision for another day, another year, another version of Rosemary who might or might not want to know the words her father had written. For now, it was enough to know that the letter existed. That Elliot had finally understood something essential about what his rejection had cost him. That his understanding changed nothing about the life she had built, but somehow made it feel more complete. The spring that followed was one of the most beautiful in Vera's memory. The coastal village emerged from winter with particular enthusiasm, gardens blooming earlier than usual, fishing boats returning with abundant catches, neighbors gathering for the first barbecues of the season. Life asserted itself with the stubborn vitality that characterized places where survival was never guaranteed. Rosemary turned 11 in April, celebrating with a party at Ada's cottage that included school friends, art supplies, and a cake that Ada insisted on baking despite her increasingly arthritic hands. Vera watched her daughter move through the celebration with easy confidence, managing social dynamics with the same careful attention she applied to her artwork. Rosemary was becoming someone distinct now, her personality crystallizing into something that belonged entirely to herself. She painted more than ever that spring. The figure at the edge of the ocean appeared in several pieces, but gradually the perspective shifted. In later paintings, the figure turned slightly toward the viewer. In the final piece of the series, the figure was gone entirely, replaced by the ocean itself, vast and beautiful and complete. Vera understood what her daughter was processing without needing to ask. Summer brought professional opportunities that required Vera to travel more than she had in previous years. A consultation in Boston. A lecture series in Philadelphia. A restoration project in Washington that would take 3 weeks to complete. She arranged for Rosemary to stay with Ada during the longer trips, checking in daily by phone, returning home between assignments whenever possible. The separations were difficult but necessary, proof that her career had reached a level where her expertise was genuinely in demand. During the Washington project, Vera received a call from the Pemberton Museum director. "Dr. Holloway, I have some news that I thought you should hear from me rather than through professional channels." The director's voice carried an unusual weight, suggesting that whatever followed would require careful handling. The Mercer family has decided to dissolve their foundation. The remaining assets, including several significant textile pieces, will be distributed among various institutions. We have been offered first selection on a collection of 18th-century samplers. Vera waited, sensing there was more. Mr. Mercer has specifically requested that you not be involved in the acquisition process. He wanted to ensure that his family's donations would not create any professional obligations or complications for you. The information landed with unexpected impact. Elliot was actively removing himself from the periphery of her life, eliminating even the accidental intersections that might occur through their shared connection to the museum. Please thank him for his consideration. Vera's voice was steady despite the complicated emotions moving through her chest. And please let him know that I would be happy to consult on the samplers if the museum wishes. His presence or absence from the acquisition process does not affect my professional judgment. I will relay that message. The call ended, leaving Vera alone in her Washington hotel room with thoughts she could not quite organize. Elliot was disappearing. Not dramatically, not with gestures designed to attract attention, but thoroughly and completely. He was removing himself from every space where their paths might cross, every institution where their work might intersect, every possibility of accidental encounter. This was what she had asked for. What she had demanded, really, in the conservation laboratory when she told him they did not need to speak again. So why did his compliance feel so strange? She finished the Washington project and returned home to find Rosemary in the midst of a creative explosion. The walls of her room were covered with new paintings, sketches, studies for pieces she was planning. Ada reported that Rosemary had barely eaten during Vera's absence, so absorbed in her work that meals felt like interruptions. "I am making something important," Rosemary explained when Vera asked about the frenzy of productivity. "I do not know what it is yet, but I know it matters." Vera recognized the feeling. She had experienced it herself during the most significant restorations of her career, the sense that the work was leading somewhere essential, that pushing through exhaustion was necessary to reach a destination she could not yet see. She did not interfere. She simply ensured that Rosemary ate, slept enough to function, and had access to whatever supplies the work required. The piece that finally emerged from the creative explosion was unlike anything Rosemary had produced before. It was a triptych, 3 connected panels that told a story through images rather than words. The left panel showed a woman standing alone against a storm, her posture bent but not broken, rain streaming around her but not touching her. The center panel showed the same woman walking through a garden, a small child holding her hand, sunlight breaking through clouds above them. The right panel showed the woman and child as they appeared now, older, standing side by side, facing the viewer with expressions of calm confidence. At the bottom of the triptych, in Rosemary's careful handwriting, were 3 words. "We are enough." Vera stood in front of the piece for a long time, tears streaming down her face, unable to speak. Her daughter had captured something essential about their journey, had translated years of struggle and triumph into images that held more truth than words could carry. "This is for you." Rosemary's voice was quiet. "Because I wanted you to know that I understand." What you did for me. What you gave up. What you built. Vera gathered her daughter into her arms and held her with the fierce love of someone who has been truly seen by the person who matters most. How did you get so wise? Gran says I take after you. Rosemary's voice was muffled against her mother's shoulder. I think maybe I just pay attention. The triptych was displayed at the Regional Youth Art Show that autumn. It won first place in its category, and Vera was not surprised when several gallery owners approached her about Rosemary's work. Her daughter was becoming someone to watch, an emerging talent with genuine vision and the technical skill to realize it. The recognition felt earned in ways that went beyond the obvious. Rosemary had processed something enormous through her art, had transformed confusion and complexity into beauty and clarity. This was what the creative process could do when it was allowed to flow without interference. Ada came to the art show despite her declining health, insisting that she would not miss seeing her great-granddaughter receive the first significant recognition of her artistic career. She stood before the triptych for several minutes, reading the words at the bottom, studying each panel with the careful attention she had taught both Vera and Rosemary. She understands. Ada's voice was thick with emotion. She knows what you did, what it cost, what it means. She is an incredible person. She comes from incredible women. Ada took Vera's hand. 4 generations of us, all standing in this room right now. Elizabeth and Rose and Julia and Sarah and me and you and that magnificent child. We made it, Vera. All of us. We made it through. Vera looked around the gallery, at the artwork displayed on every wall, at the families gathered to celebrate their children's accomplishments, at the evidence of creativity and persistence and love. She thought about the library at the Mercer estate, about the check Elliot had written without looking at her face, about the long drive to her grandmother's cottage with nothing but a baby in her belly and a determination to survive. She thought about the years of struggle, the mending of fishermen's nets, the grocery store gift cards, the boat her grandmother sold to keep them warm through February. She thought about the slow accumulation of success, the consultations and lectures and articles, the reputation built from nothing through dedication and skill. She thought about Rosemary, about this child who had grown into someone remarkable, who had never felt the absence of a father because she had never needed one to feel complete. We made it. Vera echoed her grandmother's words. We really made it. The winter that followed was Ada's last. She declined slowly, the way elderly people sometimes do, her body simply growing tired of the work required to keep living. She spent most of her time in the cottage where 4 generations of Holloway women had been born, wrapped in quilts that Vera had mended over the years, watching the ocean through windows that needed cleaning but that no one had the heart to clean. Vera and Rosemary visited every day, sometimes staying overnight, always bringing food that Ada barely touched and stories that made her smile. In her final weeks, Ada called Vera to her bedside for a conversation that would live in Vera's memory forever. I need to tell you something before I go. Ada's voice was weaker than it had been, but her eyes remained sharp, carrying the intelligence and determination that had characterized her entire life. I need you to know that I have never been more proud of anyone than I am of you. Not because of what you accomplished, though that is remarkable. Because of how you did it. With grace. With integrity. With love that never wavered even when everything around you was falling apart. Vera held her grandmother's hand, the bones so fragile now that she was afraid of applying too much pressure. You taught me everything I know about surviving. I taught you how to mend nets and bake bread and keep going when you wanted to give up. Ada's voice carried a smile even though her face was too tired to form one. You taught yourself everything else. How to turn rejection into motivation. How to build success from nothing. How to raise a daughter who understands her own worth. She paused, gathering strength for what came next. That man, the one who laughed at you in his library. He lost more than he will ever understand. But that is not why you won. You won because you stopped needing him to lose in order for you to win. You won because his existence became irrelevant to your happiness. That is the only victory that matters. The one that does not require anyone else's defeat. Vera wept, her tears falling on the quilt that covered her grandmother's frail form. I do not know how to do this without you. Yes, you do. You have been doing it all along. I was just here to remind you of what you already knew. Ada closed her eyes, exhausted from the effort of speaking. Take care of that girl. She is going to change the world someday. And when she does, remember that it started here. In this cottage. with women who refused to be broken. Ada passed 3 days later, quietly, in her sleep, with Vera and Rosemary holding her hands. The funeral was small, attended by neighbors and friends who had known Ada for decades, who remembered her as a young widow raising her daughter alone, as a grandmother taking in an orphan child, as a great-grandmother selling her husband's boat to keep her family warm. The minister spoke about resilience and love and the particular strength of women who carry entire families on their shoulders. Vera listened but did not really hear, her mind occupied with memories that no words could capture. After the service, after the reception at the cottage, after the last visitors had gone and the food had been put away, Vera and Rosemary stood on the bluff behind the cottage watching the sun set over the Atlantic. "I miss her already." Rosemary's voice was thick with grief. "So do I, baby. So do I. She told me something before she died." Rosemary did not look at her mother as she spoke, her eyes fixed on the horizon. "She said that you were the bravest person she ever knew. That you took something broken and made it beautiful. That I should grow up to be just like you." Vera wrapped her arm around her daughter, pulling her close. "She said the same thing to me about you. That you were going to change the world. Maybe we both will. Maybe we both already have." They stood together in silence as the light faded, two figures against the vast backdrop of sky and sea, holding each other up the way Holloway women had always done. The months following Ada's death were difficult in ways Vera had not anticipated. She had expected grief, had prepared for the crushing weight of loss that follows the death of someone essential. What she had not expected was the disorientation, the sense of having lost her compass, the strange reality of no longer having someone who had known her since before she was herself. Ada had been the repository of family history, the keeper of stories about grandmothers and great-grandmothers, the living connection to generations of women whose struggles had made Vera's life possible. Without her, that chain felt broken, incomplete, missing its most essential link. Rosemary processed her grief through art, as she processed everything. The cottage appeared in her paintings, rendered with loving detail that captured every weathered stone and salt-stained window. Ada appeared too, not as she had been in her final weeks but as Rosemary remembered her from earlier years, strong and practical and full of laughter. The paintings were beautiful and heartbreaking, proof that grief could be transformed into something meaningful if you had the skills and the courage to try. Vera threw herself into work, taking on more projects than she could comfortably manage, filling every available hour with tasks that demanded concentration and left no space for the thoughts that surfaced in quieter moments. Her colleagues noticed the change and worried. Her therapist noticed and recommended she slow down. Her doctor noticed and warned about the physical consequences of sustained stress. She ignored all of them, pushing through exhaustion until exhaustion pushed back. The collapse came in late spring, nearly a year after Ada's death. Vera was in her studio working on a particularly challenging restoration when her vision blurred and her hands began to shake and the room started spinning in ways that rooms should never spin. She managed to sit down before she fell, managed to call for Rosemary, managed to stay conscious until the paramedics arrived. The diagnosis was exhaustion compounded by dehydration compounded by grief that had never been properly processed. The prescription was rest, fluids, therapy, and the willingness to accept that she was not invincible. Vera spent 3 days in the hospital, surrounded by professionals who were far more comfortable telling her what to do than she was with hearing it. Rosemary stayed in the chair beside her bed, refusing to leave even when the nurses suggested she go home and sleep. "You scared me." Rosemary's voice carried an edge that Vera had never heard from her daughter. "You scared me really badly." "I know. I am sorry. Gran said you were the bravest person she knew. But brave does not mean indestructible. You cannot take care of me if you destroy yourself first." The words landed with a particular force of truth delivered by someone who loved you enough to say difficult things. Vera looked at her daughter, at this child who had grown into someone wise and strong and capable of articulating hard realities without flinching. "You are right. I have been running from something instead of facing it." "What were you running from?" "The silence. The empty space where Gran used to be. The feeling that without her, I do not know who I am anymore." Rosemary climbed onto the hospital bed, curling up against her mother the way she used to do when she was small and frightened. "You are my mother. You are a brilliant restoration expert. You are someone who built an amazing life from nothing. You are loved by everyone who knows you. Those things are who you are. Gran did not make you those things. She just reminded you when you forgot. When did you get so wise?" "I told you. I pay attention. They stayed like that, mother and daughter, until a nurse came in to check Vera's vitals and tactfully suggested that the bed was not designed for two people. The recovery was slow and humbling. Vera learned to accept help, to delegate projects, to say no to opportunities that would compromise her health. She learned that strength was not the same as endurance, that wisdom sometimes meant stepping back rather than pushing forward. She went to therapy twice a week, working through the grief she had tried to outrun, processing the complicated legacy of being the last adult Holloway woman standing. She started cooking again, something she had abandoned during the darkest months, finding comfort in the familiar rituals of preparing food for herself and Rosemary. She learned some of Ada's recipes, the ones she had watched being made but never written down, and discovered that the process of recreating them was its own form of remembrance. She started visiting Ada's cottage regularly, not to clean or organize but simply to sit in the spaces where her grandmother had lived. Sometimes she talked aloud, telling Ada about Rosemary's latest paintings or her own current projects or the small daily victories that made life worth living. She did not know if anyone was listening. But the talking helped. The letter arrived on the anniversary of Ada's death. It was from Elliot, the first communication since his promise to step back completely. The handwriting was the same careful script, the paper the same plain stock. Dear Vera, I heard about your grandmother's passing. I wanted to send condolences at the time but could not find words that did not feel intrusive or self-serving. I am sorry. That seems inadequate, but it is the truth. I have been thinking about family lately. About what it means, how it is built, why some families thrive while others destroy themselves from within. My mother and sister taught me that family was about protection. Protecting the name, the wealth, the status. They taught me that anyone who threatened those things was an enemy to be eliminated. Your grandmother taught you something different. I never met her, but I can see her influence everywhere. In the way you carry yourself. In the way Rosemary approaches the world. In the confidence that comes from knowing you are loved without conditions. I envy that. Not in a bitter way, but in the way that someone who never learned a language envies those who speak it fluently. I am still keeping my distance. Still removing myself from any space where our paths might cross. But I wanted you to know that I think about Rosemary often. Not with the desperate need I felt before, but with something calmer. Something closer to gratitude. She exists in the world. She is happy and healthy and becoming someone remarkable. That is enough. That has to be enough. I hope you are healing. I hope you are letting people help you. I hope you know that what you built is strong enough to withstand anything, even this loss. With respect. Elliot. Vera read the letter and felt something shift, something that had been locked for a very long time. She did not feel forgiveness, exactly. That word implied something had been resolved, and resolution suggested a kind of relationship that did not exist between them. What she felt was closer to release. The realization that Elliot had become, finally and completely, someone whose presence or absence no longer determined anything about her emotional state. He had changed. She could see that in his words, in the absence of self-pity or demand. He had grown into someone capable of genuinely putting his daughter's welfare ahead of his own needs. But his growth was his journey. It had nothing to do with her. She placed the letter in the locked box with the other one, the collection of documents that told the story of her life. Birth certificates and property deeds and photographs and letters from a man who would always be Rosemary's biological father but would never be her dad. Then she went to the kitchen and started dinner, moving through the familiar routine with a particular piece of someone who has finally stopped fighting a battle that was never hers to fight. Rosemary was 14 when she asked to meet him. The request came on an ordinary evening, delivered with the careful consideration that characterized all of Rosemary's important communications. They were eating dinner, the meal Vera had prepared from one of Ada's recipes, when Rosemary set down her fork and looked at her mother with an expression that suggested something significant was coming. I have been thinking about my father. Vera felt her heart accelerate, but she kept her face calm, her voice steady. What about him? I have questions. Things I want to understand about where I come from. Not because I need him in my life, but because I want to know. Vera nodded slowly, giving her daughter space to continue. I know you have letters from him. I have seen you put them in the box in your closet. I am not asking to read them, but I am asking if you would be willing to arrange a meeting. The request landed with the weight of something that had been building for years. Vera had known this moment would come eventually. She had hoped it would wait longer, but she had also prepared for the possibility that it would not. Why now? Because I am old enough to understand complexity. Because I have processed what his absence means and what it does not mean. Because I want to see for myself who he is, so I can decide what, if anything, I want from him. Rosemary's voice was steady, mature, carrying the confidence of someone who knew her own mind. And if you meet him and decide you do not want anything, then I will know that for certain instead of wondering. Vera looked at her daughter, at this person who had grown from the wreckage of rejection into something strong and beautiful and wise. I will reach out to him. But I want to be present for the meeting. And I want you to know that whatever you decide, whatever you feel afterward, I will support you completely. I know. That is why I felt safe to ask. The meeting was arranged for a neutral location, a coffee shop in a town midway between their home and wherever Elliot now lived. Vera drove with Rosemary beside her, both of them quiet with anticipation, the weight of what was about to happen filling the car like something physical. Are you nervous? Rosemary nodded. Me too. What if he disappoints me? Then you will be disappointed. And you will process that the way you process everything. And life will continue. Rosemary smiled, a small expression that acknowledged the truth of what her mother had said. What if I like him? Then you will figure out what that means. And I will support whatever you decide. Even if it hurts you. Vera reached across and took her daughter's hand. Nothing you do out of genuine need for understanding could hurt me. My job is to help you become who you are supposed to be. Sometimes that means stepping back so you can step forward. The coffee shop was nearly empty when they arrived. Elliot was already there, seated at a table in the corner, looking older and more tired than Vera had seen him at the museum exhibition years earlier. He stood when they entered, his movements uncertain, his expression a complicated mixture of hope and fear and something that looked very much like awe. Thank you for agreeing to this. His voice was directed at both of them, but his eyes were on Rosemary, drinking in the reality of her presence. Rosemary studied him with the careful attention she applied to everything. You have my mouth. The observation was matter-of-fact. I noticed that at the exhibition, but it is clearer up close. You have your mother's eyes. Elliot's voice cracked slightly. And her hands. The way you hold yourself. They sat down, the three of them arranged around a small table, the complicated geometry of family that had never quite been. I have questions. Rosemary's voice was direct. I want honest answers, even if they make you look bad. I will answer anything you ask. Why did you reject me before I was born? The question landed like a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples of silence across the table. Elliot was quiet for a long moment before answering. Because I was a coward. Because my mother told me your mother was trying to trap me, and I believed her because believing her was easier than being brave. Because I had never faced consequences for anything in my life, and I did not know how to handle a situation where my choices actually mattered. Those are reasons. Rosemary's voice was measured. But they are not excuses. No. They are not excuses. There is no excuse for what I did. Do you regret it? Every single day. Not because I want to undo my life and live a different one. But because I look at who you have become and I know that I had nothing to do with it. I missed everything. Your first words, your first steps, your first painting. I will never get those moments back. That is the consequence of my choices. Rosemary absorbed this in silence. My mother built an entire life without you. She raised me to be confident and secure and loved. She never told me to hate you. She just told me the truth and let me decide what to feel. I know. That is one of many things that makes her extraordinary. I do not need a father. Rosemary's voice was calm but firm. I have never needed one. The space where a father should be has never felt empty because my mother filled it with love and stability and everything I needed to grow. I know that too. But I am curious about you. About where some parts of me come from. About whether there are things we share beyond genetics. Elliot leaned forward slightly. I would like to answer those questions. Not because I am owed a relationship with you, but because you deserve to know your full history. The conversation continued for nearly 2 hours. Rosemary asked about Elliot's childhood, his family, the experiences that had shaped him into someone capable of making the choices he made. She asked about his interests, his work, the things that mattered to him. Elliot answered everything with the careful honesty of someone who understood that trust was not given but earned. Vera mostly listened, intervening only when the conversation seemed to need guidance, otherwise letting her daughter navigate the complicated terrain of meeting the father who had rejected her before she was born. When they finally stood to leave, Rosemary looked at Elliot with an expression that was neither warm nor cold, simply evaluating. "I do not know what I want from you yet. I need time to process this. Take all the time you need. I am not going anywhere. That might be the first promise you have kept to me." The words were pointed but not cruel, an acknowledgement of reality rather than an attack. "You are right. I hope it is the first of many." They drove home in thoughtful silence, both processing what had happened. "How do you feel?" Vera finally asked as they turned onto the coastal road that led to their village. "Complicated. He is not what I expected. He is smaller somehow. Less like a monster and more like a person who made terrible choices and has been living with the consequences. That is often how it is with people who hurt us. They are rarely as large as we imagine them. I do not love him." Rosemary's voice was matter-of-fact. "I do not hate him either. I just know who he is now. That feels important. It is important. Knowing is always better than wondering." They arrived home and moved through the familiar routines of evening, dinner, and conversation and the comfortable rhythms of a family that had been complete long before this day and would remain complete regardless of what happened next. Later, as Vera stood in Rosemary's doorway watching her daughter prepare for sleep, Rosemary looked up with an expression of profound peace. "Thank you, Mama." "For what?" "For raising me to be strong enough to handle today. For letting me make my own choices. For loving me in a way that does not depend on controlling me." Vera crossed the room and kissed her daughter's forehead. "That is what love is supposed to look like. The kind that lets you grow into who you are meant to be." The years that followed were full and rich and remarkably peaceful. Rosemary maintained occasional contact with Elliot, meeting him several times a year for conversations that gradually deepened into something approaching genuine connection. She did not call him Dad, did not treat him as a parent, but acknowledged him as a person who shared her history and was trying to become better. Elliot remained respectful of every boundary, never pushing for more than was offered, never attempting to insert himself into the family Vera had built. He became, eventually, something like a distant relative, present in Rosemary's life but never at its center. Vera watched this development with a mixture of emotions she did not try to sort into neat categories. Pride in her daughter's maturity. Relief that the relationship caused no harm. Something almost like peace about Elliot himself, who had finally become someone capable of giving without expecting anything in return. She continued her work, her reputation growing until she was recognized as one of the foremost experts in her field. She trained young professionals, passing on the knowledge she had accumulated through decades of practice. She lectured at prestigious institutions, wrote articles that other experts cited, became the person people called when they faced problems no one else could solve. She never remarried. Not because she was closed to love, but because she had learned that wholeness did not require a partner. She dated occasionally, enjoyed the company of interesting people, but never felt the need to reshape her life around someone else's presence. The cottage where Ada had lived remained in the family, maintained but not occupied, a place Vera and Rosemary visited when they needed to remember where they came from. On the 20th anniversary of the day in the Mercer Estate Library, Vera stood on the bluff behind that cottage watching the sun set over the Atlantic. She was 49 years old. Her hair showed threads of grey. Her hands bore the marks of decades of careful work. Her face carried lines that mapped the journey from that terrified young woman to this calm, accomplished professional. She thought about Elliot's words in his last letter, the one he had written after Ada's death. She thought about the observation that she had built something strong enough to withstand anything. He had been right about that. She had built something extraordinary from the wreckage of his rejection. Not in spite of him, exactly, but certainly without him. Her success, her daughter, her life, none of it required his participation or approval. The victory she had imagined in those dark early days, the fantasy of Elliot crawling back defeated while she stood triumphant, had never materialized in quite that form. What had materialized was something better. Something quieter and more profound. She had stopped needing him to lose in order for her to win. His suffering or success had become irrelevant to her happiness. His existence had become a fact about the world, no more emotionally charged than the weather or the movement of tides. This was the victory that mattered. Not the defeat of an enemy, but the transcendence of the entire framework that made him an enemy in the first place. She heard footsteps behind her and turned to find Rosemary walking across the bluff, her adult daughter now 20 years old and preparing to graduate from one of the finest art programs in the country. "I thought I would find you here. I come every year on this day." Vera smiled. "I suppose it has become a tradition. The day he rejected you. The day I decided I would not let his rejection define me." Rosemary stood beside her mother, both of them facing the vast expanse of ocean and sky. "Do you still think about him?" "Rarely. And when I do, it is without anger. He is just someone who made choices that affected my life. Those choices stopped mattering a long time ago. Gran used to say that the best revenge is living well. Your grandmother was wise about many things." They stood in comfortable silence, mother and daughter, two generations of Holloway women watching the sun paint the sky in shades of orange and gold. "I am going to include him in my graduation ceremony." Rosemary's voice was casual, as though she were discussing the weather. "I have invited him. He will sit in the audience with you and watch me receive my degree." Vera absorbed this information without visible reaction. "How do you feel about that?" "It feels right. He is part of my history, even if he was not part of my childhood. I want to acknowledge that without giving him more importance than he deserves." "That sounds like wisdom. I learned it from you." Vera wrapped her arm around her daughter, pulling her close. "I am proud of you. Not just for what you have accomplished, but for who you have become. I am proud of you too. For everything you sacrificed, everything you built, everything you taught me about what it means to be strong." The sun dipped below the horizon, leaving trails of color that faded slowly into dusk. The ocean continued its eternal rhythm, waves breaking against rocks that had stood for centuries and would stand for centuries more. Vera thought about the woman she had been 20 years ago, standing in a library being laughed at by a man who thought she was nothing. She thought about the woman she had become, standing on a bluff overlooking the Atlantic, surrounded by evidence of a life well lived. The journey between those two women had been long and difficult and often painful. But it had also been beautiful. It had produced a daughter who would change the world. It had created a legacy that would outlast any of them. She had won. Not because Elliot lost, but because winning and losing had stopped being relevant categories. She had built something complete. She was at peace. And when she looked at her daughter, at this magnificent person who embodied everything Vera had ever hoped to create, she knew that the promises she had made 20 years ago had been kept. Rosemary had never wondered if she was wanted. She had never doubted that she was enough. She had grown up knowing she was loved unconditionally, that her worth was not determined by who had rejected her before she was born. These were the promises that mattered. These were the victories that lasted. And they belonged entirely to the Holloway women. The graduation ceremony took place on a clear June morning, the kind of day that felt like a gift from the universe. Vera sat in the audience between Ada's empty chair and Elliot, who had aged gracefully into someone unrecognizable from the man who had laughed in his library 2 decades earlier. They did not speak much, did not need to, the complicated history between them having settled into something that required no ongoing negotiation. Rosemary walked across the stage to receive her degree, moving with the confidence of someone who knew exactly who she was and where she had come from. When her name was called, when the applause rose from the audience, Vera felt tears streaming down her face. Not tears of sadness but of completion, of a journey that had reached its destination, of promises made and promises kept. She thought about Ada, about what her grandmother would have said if she could have been here to see this moment. She thought about her mother, about the cancer that had taken her too soon, about the chain of women stretching back generations who had made this moment possible. She thought about the library at the Mercer estate, about the check that had fluttered to the floor, about the words that had been meant to destroy her. What a strange and beautiful path from there to here. After the ceremony, after the photographs and congratulations and hugs from friends and professors, Rosemary found her mother standing slightly apart from the crowd.